The sun had just begun to rise over the serene town of Maple Hills when a phone call disrupted the peaceful stillness of the Dawson household, located on a tree-lined street. A mother answered the phone, unaware that this moment would irrevocably alter the trajectory of their lives. The monotonous voice on the other end delivered the shocking news of a horrific series of murders. Neither Karen nor David Dawson could comprehend the gravity of what they were hearing. The unimaginable had occurred. Their daughter, Amy Dawson, was implicated in a violent spree of killings that had left the community in a state of shock and disbelief. However, this is not where our narrative commences. It begins many years prior in that same tranquil home, portraying the seemingly perfect life of a normal girl growing up in an idyllic suburban town. As the Dawson family confronts the grim reality of their child becoming a cold-blooded killer, the investigation reveals chilling details, gradually assembling the life and psyche of Amy Dawson. This documentary seeks to delve into the haunting question: how does an innocent child transform into a mass murderer, and how could her parents have overlooked the warning signs? Amy Dawson was born on a warm summer evening in June 1994, the first and only child of Karen and David. Maple Hills was a town where everyone was familiar with one another, a close-knit community characterized by minimal crime and a strong sense of belonging. David, a high school science teacher, and Karen, a nurse at the local hospital, were overjoyed when they welcomed their baby girl into their home for the first time. Amy's childhood appeared to be idyllic. A seemingly ordinary narrative unfolds regarding a girl raised in a nurturing and stable household. Amy, characterized by her quiet demeanor, was never withdrawn. She excelled academically, consistently achieving straight A's, and was a familiar face at the local youth group. As time progressed, Karen and David were continually impressed by Amy's obedience and exemplary behavior, especially when compared to her peers. She never exhibited tantrums, engaged in arguments, or deviated from established rules. Karen reflects, her voice slightly trembling, that Amy never caused them any trouble, attributing this to her naturally good disposition. Initially, they believed themselves fortunate to have such a well-behaved child. However, beneath Amy's calm facade, a more troubling reality was beginning to emerge, one that neither her parents nor the residents of Maple Hills could foresee. As Amy transitioned into her teenage years, subtle fissures in her behavior began to surface. Although Karen and David continued to view her as the ideal child, there were indications that something was amiss. Teachers at her high school started to report concerning behaviors, including disruptions in class, dark and violent artwork, and a growing tendency to withdraw from social interactions. Miss Thornton, Amy's art teacher, initially dismissed these changes as typical adolescent mood swings, stating, "I thought it was just a phase." However, she soon recognized that Amy's artwork conveyed a disturbing coldness in its portrayal of violence, lacking the emotional expression typically associated with teenage angst. Furthermore, Amy's friends began to distance themselves from her. In interviews with former classmates, many expressed a growing discomfort in her presence, with one recalling, by junior year, she had just changed. Emma's demeanor had changed significantly. It seemed as though she had ceased to care about anyone or anything. She developed a peculiar habit of staring intently, as if she were observing and anticipating an event. Despite the numerous warning signs, Amy's parents chose to overlook the issues. Karen, a nurse, attributed her daughter's unusual behavior to academic stress, while David, ever the optimist, believed Amy was merely experiencing a phase. They reassured themselves that their daughter's peculiar conduct was simply a part of the growing pains associated with adolescence. However, as investigators would later uncover, this was the initial sign of the darkness that had been brewing within Amy for years. The seemingly perfect and obedient child had been concealing something significant all along. The summer following Amy's high school graduation marked the onset of a series of murders. The body of a local drifter, Michael Grant, was discovered in the woods just outside the town, his throat brutally slashed in what appeared to be a random act of violence. Maple Hills, a community unaccustomed to such heinous crimes, was left in shock. The police had no leads, and the incident was dismissed as the work of an outsider merely passing through. However, it was not long before additional bodies began to surface. The killings were irregular, and the victims appeared unrelated: an elderly woman found dead in her home, a teenage boy discovered strangled by the riverbank, and a young mother fatally stabbed in a grocery store parking lot. Each murder escalated in violence, instilling fear within the community. Locking doors at night, a practice previously unheard of, became a common ritual for the townspeople. At that time, no one suspected Amy. She had just embarked on her college journey. Residing at home with her parents while attending a nearby university, Amy appeared to those around her as an ordinary young woman, quiet, dedicated to her studies, and the well-mannered daughter they had always known. However, investigators later uncovered that Amy was leading a double life. The seemingly obedient daughter was, in reality, a cold and calculating murderer. With each crime, she became bolder and more confident in her ability to evade capture. The unsettling truth about Amy Dawson emerged on an otherwise typical day in November. Karen and David noticed a shift in their daughter's demeanor in the weeks leading up to that day. She had grown increasingly withdrawn, her eyes appearing hollow and distant. Their world shattered when they stumbled upon her notebook, which revealed everything they thought they knew about her. While cleaning her room, David discovered a small black leather journal hidden beneath her mattress. It contained detailed accounts of her murders, meticulously chronicling how she stalked her victims, executed the killings, and felt nothing but exhilaration afterward. "At first, we thought it was a joke," David recounted, his voice thick with disbelief. "I didn't want to accept it, but the way she detailed everything, it was unmistakably our Amy." In the days that followed, Karen and David faced an agonizing decision: to turn their daughter in or to protect her. It was a choice fraught with impossibility, but as more bodies were discovered and fear gripped the community, the Dawsons realized they could no longer remain in denial. The night they contacted the police marked the most difficult moment of their lives, with Karen breaking down in tears. David made the call with trembling hands as he provided their address. When the police arrived to apprehend Amy, she did not resist, cry, or plead. Instead, she simply gazed at her parents with cold, lifeless eyes that had once reflected love and innocence. During her interrogation, Amy exhibited no remorse for the murders. She spoke in a calm, matter-of-fact manner, as if discussing the weather rather than the lives she had extinguished. Investigators were taken aback by her utter lack of empathy. She felt no guilt or shame, only a detached curiosity about the extent of her own actions. Detective Harris, the lead investigator, remarked that Amy was unlike anyone he had ever interrogated. Most individuals display some form of emotion, fear, anger, or regret, but Amy was devoid of such feelings, which was chilling. In her confession, she disclosed that she had begun fantasizing about killing at a young age, describing the sense of power she experienced when taking a life and how it made her feel invincible. The murders, she explained, were a means for her to exert control over a world from which she felt increasingly alienated. The evidence against her was overwhelming, including her journal, confession, and forensic findings, all confirming her guilt. However, as the trial approached, a haunting question lingered for her parents, investigators, and the community: why had Amy, a girl raised in a loving home, transformed into a monster? The trial of Amy Dawson became one of the most sensational events in the town's history, attracting reporters from across the nation eager to cover the story. The narrative of a small-town girl who transformed into a mass murderer captivated the community. Each day, the courtroom was filled with local residents, journalists, and even curious onlookers eager to catch a glimpse of Amy. In the front row, Karen and David sat, their expressions pale and strained. Their attorney had advised them against speaking to the media, yet their silence only intensified public speculation. How could two devoted parents raise a child who became a killer? What had gone awry? Amy's defense team contended that she suffered from an undiagnosed mental illness, citing her violent fantasies and lack of empathy as indicators of a more profound psychological issue. They called upon expert witnesses to discuss the potential for antisocial personality disorder or psychopathy. Conversely, the prosecution, armed with Amy's own chilling confessions and journal entries, depicted her as a cold, calculating individual who was fully aware of her actions. Ultimately, the jury reached a verdict in under 2 hours: guilty on all counts. Amy Dawson was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. As the judge pronounced the sentence, Amy displayed no emotion, as if the outcome held no significance for her. Although the trial concluded, for Karen and David Dawson, the nightmare continued. Their daughter, the child they had cherished and nurtured, was a mass murderer. The burden of this truth was unbearable, prompting them to leave Maple Hills, unable to endure the stares and whispers of former friends and neighbors. They relocated to a distant small town where their past remained unknown. In the ensuing years, Karen, David grappled with the reality of their situation as they made a single visit to Amy in prison, an encounter that proved too painful to repeat. Amy appeared cold and distant, as if she hardly recognized them. "I don't know that girl," Karen remarked softly. "The child we raised is gone, I don't know who that woman is." The narrative of Amy Dawson remains a haunting tale for the community of Maple Hills, characterized by deception and the facade of a seemingly perfect child concealing a dark and violent truth. It also illustrates the tragic consequences of denial, as Karen and David, in their wish to see the best in their daughter, overlooked the signs indicating something was profoundly amiss. Experts have noted that Amy's behavior displayed many characteristics associated with sociopathy, including a lack of empathy, a desire for control, and a talent for manipulation. However, the question persists: how much of this behavior stemmed from her genetic makeup, and how much was influenced by her upbringing? Could the tragedy have been averted, or was Amy inevitably destined for this dark trajectory? Although Amy Dawson's trial concluded with a guilty verdict, the repercussions of her actions continue to reverberate throughout Maple Hills and beyond. The psychological toll of her crimes and the subsequent revelations have left an indelible impact on all those involved in the case. This chapter of Amy's life transcended mere legal analysis; it became a disturbing exploration of the most unsettling aspects of human nature. The emotional disintegration of Karen and David paralleled the revelation of their daughter's true identity. In their quest for understanding, they consulted psychologists who scrutinized Amy's behavior from her early years into adulthood. Each session deepened the parents' despair as experts examined Amy's seemingly idyllic childhood. Dr. Stanley Herz, one psychologist, interpreted Amy's emotional detachment as a sign of psychopathy, a condition that had likely been developing for years. He noted that she likely processed emotions differently than most individuals, even as a child. Emotional detachment had been evident, and there was no rebellion due to a lack of genuine connection to her surroundings. Karen would later reflect that these meetings, while illuminating, felt akin to repeated wounds to her already shattered heart. How could the girl she had lovingly cradled, sung to sleep, and cherished so deeply transform into someone capable of such heinous acts? The expert's portrayal was not of a child who had strayed from the path, but rather one who might have been predisposed to destruction from the outset. David, ever the pragmatist, found some comfort in comprehending the scientific explanations for Amy's behavior. However, this understanding did not alleviate the persistent guilt. Had they somehow played a role in her descent into darkness? Was there an alternative course of action they could have taken? Each response from the expert seemed to generate countless additional questions, none of which provided the closure they so desperately sought. Amy's existence behind bars was equally disconcerting. She maintained a cold and composed demeanor, which remained unchanged as the years went by. Both prison guards and inmates described her as disturbingly calm, exhibiting no signs of remorse or fear. Her complete indifference to her circumstances baffled the staff, some of whom had worked with violent offenders for decades and had never encountered someone so detached from their crimes. "She doesn't seem to care that she's here," remarked one correctional officer who interacted with Amy daily. "Most individuals become angry or at least upset upon realizing they are imprisoned for life, but not her. It's as if she has already accepted her fate, or worse, as if she never cared at all." Amy cultivated a reputation within the prison for her intellect and manipulative tendencies. While she seldom participated in physical confrontations, she possessed a remarkable ability to psychologically dominate those around her. Although she was not overtly cruel, she skillfully instigated discord among the inmates, pitting them against one another with her carefully selected words. It did not take long for Amy to become a shadowy figure within the prison, feared not for her physical strength, but for her cunning. In interviews with prison psychologists, Amy exhibited a disconcerting detachment when questioned about her feelings of remorse for the murders, responding chillingly with a simple, "No, they were necessary." Back in Maple Hills, the shock of Amy's crimes persisted long after the trial. The once peaceful town, known for its friendly neighbors and close-knit community, became infamous as the residence of a mass murderer. The sense of betrayal was palpable, as many of Amy's former friends, teachers, and neighbors struggled to reconcile the sweet, quiet girl they had known with the violent killer she had become. "You think you know someone," remarked Miss Thornton, Amy's high school art teacher. "I looked at her artwork for years, and yes, there was darkness in it, but I never imagined it was real. I never thought for a second that she was capable of what she did." Local parents grew increasingly protective of their own children, with some even seeking psychological evaluations for their kids, terrified that they too might be concealing hidden darkness. The fear that someone could live among them for years without revealing their true nature haunted the town, leading Karen and David to make the difficult decision to sell their home. Their decision to leave their home and relocate was influenced by the pervasive whispers in town, the sideways glances, and the unbearable weight of knowing that their daughter had caused so much suffering. Although moving away did not erase the painful memories, it provided them with an opportunity to begin anew, even if that new beginning came with an invisible burden that remained largely unrecognized by others. Perhaps the most profound tragedy was the death of John Dawson, Amy's cousin and one of her earliest victims. John had initially survived the attack but ultimately succumbed to his injuries in the hospital weeks later. His death, while not as brutal as some of Amy's other acts, left a lasting scar on the Dawson family. For David and Karen, John's passing represented an irreparable loss that further fractured their already broken family. His parents, David's brother and sister-in-law, could barely look at them after the trial, burdened by the knowledge that their niece had taken their son's life. Family gatherings, once filled with joy and warmth, were now overshadowed by absence and silence. David later reflected on this painful reality, stating that losing John was particularly devastating. "Yes, many lives were lost, and I do not diminish any of them, but John was family, he was our blood, and Amy took him from us." Amy Dawson's case sparked a national debate, with many questioning whether true justice had been achieved. Her apparent lack of remorse and her calculated approach to the killings led some to argue that life imprisonment was insufficient. Shouldn't someone so cold and unrepentant face the death penalty? Conversely, others contended that Amy's mental state should have been given greater consideration. In her sentencing, the question arose whether she was genuinely in control of her actions or merely a manifestation of a profoundly disturbed mind. Legal scholars examined the case, highlighting Amy as a representation of the intricacies within the criminal justice system. The dilemma of punishment versus rehabilitation was prominent. Could someone like Amy be rehabilitated, or was she beyond redemption? Was her emotional detachment treatable, or was it an inherent aspect of her being? Ultimately, Amy remained incarcerated, her sentence unchanged, yet the discourse surrounding her fate persisted long after the trial, evolving into a significant case study in both legal and psychological fields. Her crimes, coupled with the absence of definitive answers, left an enduring impact on both the local community and the nation as a whole. Karen and David's lives were irrevocably altered, the burden of having raised a killer weighed heavily upon them. Despite psychologists' reassurances that Amy's behavior stemmed from factors beyond their influence, they sought comfort in small aspects of life: a new home, new routines, and each other. However, the void created by Amy's actions, John's death, and the loss of their family's innocence could never be completely filled. "We visit her sometimes," Karen confessed in one of her final interviews, "but it's difficult. She's not the same person, or perhaps she is, and we simply never truly understood her. I don't know which is worse." David, maintaining a stoic demeanor, bore the visible burden of a man who had endured excessive suffering. "You do what you can to move on," he stated, "but there's no real moving on from this." The narrative of Amy Dawson serves as a chilling reminder of the darkness that can lurk beneath the surface. Even in the most unremarkable lives, there exists a narrative that provokes more inquiries than resolutions: a tale of nature versus nurture, guilt and innocence, love and betrayal. For Karen and David Dawson, as well as the community of Maple Hills, this is a narrative they will bear for the entirety of their lives. Ultimately, it transcends the story of a girl who became a murderer. It delves into the fragility of trust, the unpredictability of human behavior, and the dire repercussions of turning a blind eye. The Dawsons, once a family filled with joy and laughter, now find their lives overshadowed by silence and grief, a family fragmented by the darkness that had long been brewing within their own household. For the residents of Maple Hills, the wounds inflicted by Amy's actions will never completely mend. They will perpetually question whether there was something they could have done, some indication they might have noticed. Yet, the harsh reality remains: some monsters are beyond containment.